So I think, step one for most chief digital officers is, let's create the strategy and get the strategy agreed to. And there's almost a strategy behind creating a strategy. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience in New York City and how you created a digital strategy for New York?
Absolutely. And thank you again for having me. It's really delightful to be here and exciting to hear about all the different perspectives of the folks you've gathered. So I joined the Bloomberg administration in January 2011, and it was a newly created role that thankfully, and which was very exciting to me, was a role that really encouraged a self-starter mentality. And one of the first tasks was to establish what the priorities would be. And I was essentially tasked with creating a 90-day report. So I would start in the role, learn about government, and then identify here are our priorities. And for me, it was this amazing crash course in local government. Before that, I came from a startup background. So first learning the ins and outs of the organizational structure of the city of New York, which is enormously complex, hundreds of thousands of employees. And then digging even deeper into that structure to find out what are we doing digitally and what could we be doing. And what was very important to me and to my team and to my colleagues was that we didn't go into this saying, we've got it all figured out, even though perhaps you've been doing your job for 20, 30 years, we're gonna let you know how to improve on it. And we were really glad we didn't take that perspective and that approach because we learned so much in that process. And basically, our approach was to go to first our colleagues within city government and say, we're here to be an advocate for you. We're here to help support you and achieve your goals. So first, tell us something you're really proud of that you've achieved digitally that you would like more people to know about. Brag a little bit. Because that process helped us to identify a lot of digital assets that we didn't even know were there. The second question we asked was, if there's something you'd like to do, but you haven't been able to achieve it for whatever reason, this is your opportunity. Use this as a vehicle to move that forward. And if it's aligned in the right ways, if it is the combination of low-hanging fruit, not requiring too much time and resources, and also being deeply aligned with your agency's goals or key performance indicators, then let's use this opportunity to make that happen. And that was helpful for us because it helped us to identify initiatives in which we already had a champion because they were already wanted to do that. So we met with dozens and dozens of colleagues.
Give us some examples of the people you met with.
So some of the examples would be, I think one of the best examples was, in addition to meeting with colleagues, we asked the public for a lot of, and I'll get back to why I'm bringing this up, for a lot of input. And one of the things the public asked for was, if you're from New York, you may be familiar with 311, which is the city's customer service platform for city services. And they said, why isn't there an app that allows you to take a picture of a pothole with your iPhone or your smartphone, detect your GPS location and send it off to the city. And when we met with 311, we found out, in fact, this app already existed. Wow. So here was an opportunity to really just market and promote an asset that we already have, bring it up to speed because it hadn't been updated for several months or probably nearly a year, and promote it to the public and help them realize some of these resources are already there. So a lot of what that process was, it was discovering that there was an enormous amount of innovation happening. There was more of a disconnect between that innovation reaching the public and really reaching those folks.
Well, it sounds like, too, a lot of mistakes chief digital officers and others in planning make is that you look at what you're lacking and not what you already have. You clearly were looking at both, not only what do we need and what are people asking for, but the assets that are already here and sort of uncovering all those assets before even creating the strategy, which is an interesting.
Absolutely, because, and I think if you don't do that, you'll end up, sort of reinventing the wheel, duplicating efforts. We were able to identify that there were a lot of initiatives that had already been launched or perhaps similar initiatives in different agencies, 2 or 3 agencies sometimes doing the same thing, and instead we can hone in on which strategy is working, which product works the best, and we can consolidate around that. And so that was the first and most exciting part of the strategy, gathering all of that input. And in addition to the public, in addition to our colleagues within government, also working very closely with New York City's tech sector because we have such bright minds and creative individuals who had really great ideas for how we could move things forward. And in many cases, we're willing to partner with the city or donate their assets or their services pro bono in order to help us to help us achieve those goals. Sure. So between or among all of those different inputs, we were able to develop the city's digital strategy and do so in a way that we felt confident we'd be able to achieve it but before the end of the Bloomberg administration.
Sure. And as far as that app goes, I'm still fascinated. Was it widely adopted, or was it not really adopted? Was it a lack of PR that didn't get it widely adopted? What was it about that people didn't know it existed?
It was a combination of, and I think you see this sometimes in organizations, whether it's private sector or public sector, that you think that once you create the tool, you're done. And in reality, you've actually just begun. So and I think this happens across the board, there had been a lot of energy and effort into creating the app. And once it was there, the marketing it and continuing to iterate on it and improve it, that step wasn't there because attention was drawn to other needs. And especially in city government, there are constantly new and emerging needs. So there was a lack of promotion and marketing and continuing to improve on that app, so it was a combination. What we did with the app in order to make sure that more people were aware of it was that one of the initiatives in the roadmap was to relaunch the city's website, nyc.gov. After we relaunched it, we added call-outs to make sure that people knew the app was there. Mm-hmm. There's a call to action to download it on the homepage as you're trying to complete a 311 request. So we have promoted it significantly, and that led to a dramatic increase in downloads of the app.
I recall seeing 311 commercials. Did you have an ad budget, and did you work together with the marketing team to do things like that, get the word out?
So the commercials and promos is a great example of the advantages of the chief digital officer role being part of the mayor's office of media and entertainment. Right, so it was the brainchild, obviously, of Mayor Bloomberg, but also Commissioner Catherine Oliver, who led that agency for many years and had the vision to move beyond film and television and realize we need to be investing in the city's digital strategy. And it was she who designed the role and evolved it and recruited me to join. And the fortunate element of being part of that agency is that it had in-house a TV crew and a full creative team. So we were able to do that in-house at no additional charge. Obviously, there are resources expended. And we did that for the 311 app. We did that for nyc.gov and for a variety of other promotions of various digital products being launched across the city's agencies.
Oh, that's fantastic. So step one for a chief digital officer, let's get this strategy right. And step two is you've got to get input from key stakeholders. You have so many stakeholders, not just the individuals, employees, but also customers. And I like the way you approach customers, especially Governor Cuomo's approach on the focus on the customer. But tell us about the challenges and the ease of which you were able to get buy-in from all the stakeholders and some of the departments you went to get buy-in.
Absolutely. So the key to the roadmap for us was it wasn't just developing the strategy, it was gaining the trust of our colleagues and their support and making them realize that we were there to help them succeed because we were a small team, hardworking team, but there was no way we were going to achieve all of the initiatives that we had in our roadmap. We really needed to enlist partners across the city to do that. And so that's why we said, what would you like to launch that you haven't launched? What do you have perhaps that's already in flight, but you know you're going to need a little more support, a little other sort of push and encouragement down the line to make sure it really happens? And in that way, we knew that we weren't signing up our colleagues for things they wouldn't be able to deliver on. We knew that these were initiatives that were already priorities within their agencies. And also, we wanted to have an opportunity to take sort of a carrot approach rather than a stick approach and say, we're going to help you get some really great recognition. We're going to help you to reach your KPIs and however you measure success. Those are the initiatives that we're going to help you to achieve. So we did a lot to help to promote any success that we saw across the organization, whether it was internally or with the press. We created something called our SMART committee, which is our social media advisory and research task force that drew in all of the rock stars in digital from across the city, recognized them. And in some cases, these were folks who previously had not been recognized as helping and more sort of been a challenge to the organization. And now we were deputizing them and saying, you're the key to our success.
Sure.
And internally, it made the commissioners and the agencies and departments proud and happy and helped to gain their trust and buy-in. And externally also helped to show there's a ton going on within the city of New York that you may not be aware of digitally.
Right. And what's, for people who want to follow you, you have such a great, like you said, there's a community out there that really supports you and favorites you and retweets you. What's your Twitter address so people can follow you?
My Twitter account is my name, my married name, Rachel Haot, RACHEL HAOT. And, but if you have ideas for the state, because we're in the phase now of gathering input for the state's digital roadmap, I encourage everyone to follow @NYLovesTech. And the same hashtag also if you have ideas for how we can improve. And that's also been very exciting to shift that focus and look at how we can improve there.
Great, and back to stakeholders. So I can't imagine the challenges in getting buy-in from, so you've got, I would think more than this, but probably three main constituents, right? You've got the employees of the city of New York and now the state of New York. You've got customers. I love that you call them customers. You know, it's your constituency. You think about it, the government as an organization or a company, and then you've got all these other departments. How many employees in the city of New York? How many employees in the state?
Absolutely. So there are hundreds of thousands of employees.
It's like the size of GE. I mean, New York State is like 460,000 employees, and GE is, I think Ganesh Bell is here, I think it's like 330,000 employees at GE.
And the city was closer to IBM, about 300,000, and was, you know, probably around between 250,000 and 300,000 during the Bloomberg administration. Right. So there are enormous number of stakeholders and different elements to consider within the city and within the state. There's also an incredibly wide amount of diversity in terms of levels of access, levels of digital literacy, and this was a big part of why the digital strategy that we developed, it couldn't just be about the shiny new app, and it couldn't cater to folks who already were part of this world, and that's why our digital roadmap ended up being more comprehensive than perhaps we initially imagined, because we realized, okay, in order for us to achieve this goal, to be the most digital city in the world, we're going to have to first make sure that all of our residents, everyone who lives and works here and visits here, is able to get online. That's the fundamental. Has the knowledge and the training and the ability to use those tools once they are online. And building on that has other building blocks, whether it's data or tools for engagement, and finally, you know, tools related to economic development to really thrive once they're there.
Wow, so that's the employees. Now how about customers? I love you think of these people as customers.
Right.
How many people, I think 20 million in New York State?
Yes.
40% of that is in New York City?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why it was very helpful for us to start with that sort of, not microcosm, because New York City does have
it's all about
enormous
inclusion. You have to be so inclusive. You know, if you're at Starbucks, at CDO at Starbucks, you don't have to worry about digital literacy or getting people online or educating them. You're just worried about getting them an app that they can use to buy a cup of coffee.
Right. And in some ways, I think it's fantastic discipline, because there are certain rules we have to follow with respect to how we develop digital tools. So for example, ADA compliance, making sure that people of different disability levels are able to use the tools, whether you're visually impaired, various different
on that
different
note,
levels
I
of abilities.
hear that New York City is the most linguistically diverse city in the world. There are 800 languages in New York City. You're not dealing with just English and Spanish. That's 800 languages.
And the city's 311 service, for example, can support 180 of those languages.
What?
And online, we also wanted to replicate that. So that's actually tied to the same challenge. But really what I see as an advantage that I was speaking about before. So for example, not to get too much in the weeds, but you can't do things like locking text into images, or not using enough contrast, and you want to avoid things like using PDFs. Pretty basic best practices, but things that the city needed to adopt.
Why?
Because a screen reader, for example, which is a tool that you'll use if you're not able to read the screen visually, it can't detect it. And that same technology is what underlines what makes something search engine optimized. For example, if a screen reader can't read it, a bot that's crawling and indexing your website for Google or another search engine probably can't read it either. So both of those things actually helped us to be even better at our jobs. making sure that more people can access it. It's harder to design that way up front, but down the line, it actually makes it really makes the product much stronger and more robust, and that really helped us ultimately.
And then the third, in employees, customers, and then departments. You gave an example while we were chatting earlier about incenting other departments to participate. And there was one with the Department of Small Business Services and Tumblr. Did you want to maybe give an example of some department?
Absolutely. So that was a great example of a situation where interests really aligned. And that became one of our big challenges. We were very fortunate at the city, and now again seeing that same outpouring of support at the state level, where you have the private sector saying, what can we do to help? How can we contribute? And our biggest challenge was not recruiting that interest, but aligning it and finding out times when, okay, will this really help us reach our goals? Is this something that's going to help us solve an articulated existing challenge, or is this a solution in search of a problem? And we weren't really interested in those. We were interested in situations where...
You don't want to just do digital for digital's sake.
Exactly.
Right.
It had to always be driven by the end goal and the end strategy. So that's how we began every conversation with the agencies and the departments. We said, how do you measure success as an agency? Don't even think about digital.
Right.
Put that aside for now. How do you measure success? And then we'd work backwards and say, where do your constituents live online? Do they even live online? If they didn't know, they'd do a survey or they'd find out. And some of those surveys, they may not have been scientific because that would have been enormously expensive, but they would, for example, poll their constituents. The agency that provides, for example, food stamps and social benefits, they ask their constituents, how do you use technology? And the results totally blew them away. More than 80% had smartphones, more than 70% were on Facebook every single day. So it made us realize, okay, we need to be leveraging these tools if we want to successfully reach and serve these our constituents.
So how does Mashable and Tumblr fit into that?
So that was a great example. The Department of Small Business Services, they have centers throughout the city of New York. They were hearing from a lot of their customers, which are small business owners and entrepreneurs, that they were overwhelmed by using digital for their businesses, and they didn't know how to do it in a strategic way. So they came to us and we said, okay, well, we could work on creating a curriculum in-house, but that could be expensive. Let's see if we can partner with an existing expert who's out there. So we thought of Mashable because they have these great social media 101 guides, and we thought of some of our partners and really cast a wide net. And we worked with Tumblr, and we worked with PayPal and Square and Squarespace and all kinds of different blogging platforms, e-commerce solutions. E-payments was a big concern. And we said, can you help us develop a curriculum that presents the different options? It couldn't be overly branded or favoring any one product, and they were all comfortable with that. And we developed this great curriculum in collaboration with the Small Business Services Department. We taught the trainers, and we trained instructors to teach this to other entrepreneurs, and more than 1,000 people graduated from the course and were able to use those tools.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a great example. So to recap, so step one for every digital leader is let's get that digital strategy together. Step two, let's get that input from all of the key stakeholders. And now step three, we need support from our boss, right? And I think most successful CDOs that we see out there are reporting into the CEO. And they're usually somewhat tech savvy. Was it helpful, so for step three, was it helpful for you to have someone like a Mayor Bloomberg who was an innovator? You know, I used to work at Reuters, and we used to curse him every day, you know. Back in the day, I would go to the Delta Air terminal, and everywhere you looked, you'd see a Bloomberg terminal. What a brilliant marketing move to put a Bloomberg terminal in every business lounge in airports, you know. And I just used to shake my fist at him every night, you know.
I'd love to hear
so
that.
Was it useful to find someone who was technical and an innovator and a real, you know, business person to have as a boss? And how supportive was he of your efforts?
It was incredibly useful, and the very move of appointing a chief digital officer sends a message throughout the organization that this is a priority, and it's important to have the buy-in at every level. I think it's equally important to have the mandate and the buy-in from the top as it is from your colleagues and peers across the organization. But what it did was it really set the tone, and Mayor Bloomberg's leadership as a technologist really was phenomenal. Sure. And he truly understands customer service on a deep deep fundamental level. And that's also been something that has really been a distinguishing factor of my work now with Governor Cuomo, who similarly has a deep commitment to customer service. And
it's amazing to hear a government official with customer service in the same sentences, and I love that about Cuomo and about Mayor Bloomberg.
And I think what it comes down to is when you look at how the average constituent engages with government, it is through these services.
Right.
And if we can improve some of these processes that maybe haven't been the most fun or the most efficient services and processes in the past, digital is a fantastic tool to achieve that. And it helps to do a lot of things. It helps to translate the government world and government language and government structure into something that's fully user-centric. Right. And that was our overarching goal as a digital organization, was how do we take this structure that may have been agency-centric or government-centric, and how do we, using digital, make it completely...
And decades or a century old.
Yes, and that is also a challenge that any organization faces.
Sure.
How do we make it completely user-centric? And so that you, as the constituent, you don't need to know which agency is responsible for solving your problem.
Right.
You just need to know what your problem
just get the pothole fixed.
And we'll do the rest of the work for you. And that is the sort of simple truth that's behind a lot of what I think the digital challenge is at the government level.
Fantastic. So step 3, you've got a CEO buy-in. Now,
right.
Step 4, CDOs, contrary to, again, to dispel another myth, it's not the lone, Steve
right.
Jobs, lone wolf is going to save the planet. It's really about a team. So tell us, and I think you're kind of the figurehead for this organization, but you've got a team behind you. Tell us a little bit about your organization. Well, when you were at New York City,
Absolutely.
About the team and the people you worked with.
The structure there, and a really important part of the goal there, was to gain the trust of our peers and colleagues across government, because again, there's no way you can achieve any of this on your own. And at the City of New York, that translated into, we had a citywide Chief Information Officer, Rahul Merchant.
Rahul?
He's no longer in the role, but
you worked closely with?
Yes, so we worked closely with him and his team, and they would be responsible for internal IT, for example. At the state, we have a similar structure. Brian Digman is the CIO at the state level. In addition to that,
did Rahul see you as competitive, or was there a good differentiation of duties?
There was a great differentiation of duties, I think, and a real great division of labor, because our focus was on the public-facing piece of digital and connecting that to the public and helping to leverage that. Digital design, for example, and those elements. And it was really critical.
And his business is more about making sure everyone has connectivity.
Keeping the lights on, internal.
It's very similar to organization to you.
Right, and really making sure that everything worked. And from day one, he made that very clear that was his focus, and I truly appreciated that. And we were able to get some really exciting things done.
Is there a CMO at New York City?
There is no CMO. I think that would
It's more on the PR and comms and the communications.
Well, we worked very closely with the press office,
right.
and the press secretary. Same thing at the state level. Work incredibly closely with the communications office, because so much of what we do is about communications. When you look at social, one of the great advantages that it has and benefits that it has to government is that oftentimes in government, the story won't be covered unless it's scandalous or negative. And there are so many exciting and positive stories that perhaps because they didn't have that combination of factors wouldn't be covered by the mainstream media, or they might be covered incorrectly. And success used to be that you would issue a press release. This is what Commissioner Catherine Oliver used to always say, and part of why she created the Chief Digital Officer role. Used to issue a press release, you'd hope that someone picked it up, you'd hope that they covered it accurately. With social media, you can tell that story directly to your constituents. You can respond to their questions or their concerns or their complaints immediately, and what that net effect is you're humanizing government. And it doesn't just seem like this nameless, faceless organization, it is this responsive, dynamic organization. And that helped enormously. So press office, CIO, another group that we worked with very closely at the city, and again, work with the same equivalent at the state, was the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, which supports all sectors, and we specifically would work with them on supporting the tech sector. Now at the state level, we work very closely with the Empire State Development Corporation, which has a similar goal. So it's really exciting, and what we try to do and bring to the table is the big picture view that brings together all of these different partners in a way that looks at everything through the digital lens to achieve success, so that each of them each partner is able to focus on their goal and what they measure success by as an agency, and we're able to knit it all together in a way that really creates this user-centric approach and helps the public.
Oh, that's fantastic. And did you have a team reporting to you? I mean, you seem like you're doing so many things so well. Is there a team reporting? Was there a team reporting to you? And how big was that team?
Had
What
a
kinds of
small
things
team
did they do?
a small dedicated team, in addition to obviously the dozens and hundreds of people at the IT agencies and ESD and all of these different organizations, vendors, for example, who we might work with to bring some outside perspective and expertise.
Was it challenging in the government to work with outside vendors because they have to be GSA approved and you couldn't always get the hottest tech startups to help you, or was that not an issue?
I would say that is an issue. I think if you talk to anyone who's building anything digital within government, it's a known fact that we need to do more to improve how procurement works.
So was hackathons and things like
Right.
that one of your ways to get around it, really encouraging innovation in the city without having to go through?
I wouldn't say we ever tried to get around anything. We
One
followed
of the ways of
every
tapping
rule
into
to the letter.
Yeah, and tapping
but it was,
into the talent
exactly,
in the
it
city.
was creative ways to collaborate that really allowed us to bring in fresh perspectives. Mm-hmm. And the thing about hackathons, and I could go on and on about hackathons, and sometimes even recently some people question how useful are hackathons, and maybe perhaps before they were even more useful. For us, where we see it useful is it opens up government to outside perspectives. Yeah. It helps to add strategy and direction to some of the raw resources we put out there, like open data sets, and It helps to say, here's how we think this could be used to benefit the public. We want to see your ideas. We want to acknowledge that we may not have all the answers, and especially in a city and in a state that's as talented as New York, you would be at a loss if you're not inviting that kind of participation. So we did a hackathon around the new NYC.gov, and one of the other exciting ones we did was reinvent payphones. We encouraged ideas on the future of payphones. We know people are using them less than they used to, but we also know that there's enormous telecommunications needs. How can we update those? So hackathons were great, but I would say that the real benefit of hackathons and outcome that was most advantageous was that you developed stronger ties between the tech community and the government community. Right. Both incredibly passionate, dynamic, entrepreneurial groups of people who perhaps had never met before. And when you get them together, that means down the line, when someone has a question, they know who to go to, and you foster all kinds of collaboration. And that's what was
That's
what was
amazing.
Most exciting
That's
to us.
really the title of this topic: improving government public engagement through digital innovation. And you just did some unique things to really bring that out. And I want to get back to that. But one question I had for you before we go there was your sort of the bigger picture on your view of the role of the chief digital officer. And you have these 5 pillars of success, which I think is really unique, and that I don't know that many other CDOs are following those. And do you want to go into that?
Absolutely. And I'll try to keep it brief because it's maybe not the most exciting part of our digital strategy, but basically those 5 pillars came out of the research that we did. We went into the process of developing the digital roadmap with a few things in mind. We need to improve the website. We need to support the tech sector. What we realized as we dug deeper and we got more input from the public, from experts, from technologists, we realized that we need the fundamentals in place if we're going to achieve any of this. It doesn't matter how great that app is if the people who live in our city or the people who live in our state don't have the connectivity they need to use it. So we developed these 5 pillars based on that. So the foundation is access, internet access, and infrastructure.
Access. You've got to give people access before we do anything else.
That's the fundamental. You need to have that in place, or else it really doesn't matter how great all of the other ensuing innovations are. The second piece was education. So once people are connected, let's make sure that they have the tools and the knowledge and the skills they need to successfully use these technologies. And to that end, within the city, the mayor introduced more than 40 different programs that taught people from 5 years old all the way up through senior citizens how to use the internet. Served more than a million individuals. And
again, really goes back to most corporations don't have to worry about the needs of the people who most could use the help, the elderly, the less educated, the young.
And perhaps there may be some opportunities to educate, but for the large part, they're just taking their their customer base at face value and saying, well, this is who they are, and we're gonna meet them where they are online. We did that as well, but we had the opportunity in addition to say, well, maybe there are people we're not reaching yet who we could be reaching if we gave them the tools and the training they need to get online. And some of the infrastructure projects included launching digital vans that would go to public housing projects and provide, they would tweet out their location and also post it online and physically in person at the various housing projects. Say, if you need to use a computer, do you need to type up your resume, apply to a job, you can come here at these times. And in addition to dozens and dozens of computer centers, that I could really go on, but it served all told over 1 million individuals.
Wow, so number one, access.
Number one,
Number two,
access. Number two,
education.
education. Number three is big data, and we called this open government. So it really came down to having an internal approach that was transparent and accountable and open for collaboration. And in order to be open for collaboration, we realized we really needed to share the data sets, both from an information standpoint, but I think perhaps even more interesting from a logistics and operational standpoint.
Why do you say that?
It's more interesting that way because when you open up your operational data and you allow the public to help develop tools, the public really becomes a partner in government, and they're truly empowered because instead of saying, well, I give government my taxes and they give me back services, instead they realize, actually, I can help to improve the way this... I am government, exactly. I can help to improve the way government works and functions, and if I have a better idea, I mean, how many times have you ever said, there must be a better way that this process works? Well, now you can do that by leveraging that open data and participating in hackathons and innovation challenges. So that was the piece on big data. At the city, we had a great chief data officer, Mike Flowers. At the state, we also have a really fantastic team working on data structure, including Andrew Nicklin, who was previously at the city, and that's really been key to our strategy. So building on big data, there's only two more pillars, is engagement, and that's where the apps come into play. That's where we, for example, exercised our approach of a mobile-first, user-centric website for the city of New York. Almost no city in the US and even across the world had really embraced that philosophy and that practice before. And we were able to deliver just a world-class website with collaboration from a lot of different partners. We worked with Huge, the design firm as well. And the city of New York also has over 300 different social media channels, so really expanding that footprint. And the social media audience at the city more than tripled while we were there to over 4 million, which was across all the different agencies. Today, the state reaches more than 1 million individuals through its social media channels, which is a great place to start, and we're excited to build on that further. So that's the fourth pillar, and then the last piece, which we hope results from investments in all of those 4 building blocks, is industry. And that's so key to the success of the public and the city, of the state, making sure that individuals are employed and have jobs, and also obviously ties into government.
I didn't understand industry, so you meant encouraging growth and
encouraging
jobs
economic development and growth and the creation of jobs and the creation of value. So if you have all of these pieces in place, we hopefully encourage a thriving tech sector that also comes up with digital innovations that we can apply at the government level. And that's what came from our input, and that was really us just analyzing and reflecting back what was told to us in our research.
Great. So now all CDOs in the room, or any digital leader, you've identified the strategy, right? Now you've built, you've got all your key inputs. You've met with all the stakeholders. You've built your team. You've got buy-in from the CEO. Next step is you've got to go out and actually do it. And New York City is just an incredible example. She creates this digital roadmap, and within, 3 years, you accomplish 100% of the some 40-odd objectives in the roadmap. So tell us a little bit about the roadmap and some of the results.
And that achievement is due to having incredibly hardworking colleagues. And something that Mayor Bloomberg always said, and is absolutely true, is that the exciting things that are announced, that we see in the headlines are the work of hundreds of thousands of individuals. For us, it wasn't even just internal employees, it was also tons of tech partners. Externally, it was input from the public as well. And that was really, the fruits of that was the achievement of the digital roadmap. And I think that the plan itself was designed so that we never put our colleagues in a position to have to deliver on something that they didn't have the resources to deliver on.
Right.
And
well, you want to show some successes too, especially early on. I know a lot of
Absolutely.
CDOs try to get incremental successes so that they
Right.
can build the bigger projects later once we see some things that are working.
Right.
It's easier to build
And
buy-in.
the press was actually a great form of leverage for us as well to make sure things got done, because we committed to updating the public every year on the progress of the digital roadmap. And we did that every year. And it forced us as an organization to go back through that list and say, this is in progress, this hasn't been started yet, how do we move that forward? And it created that kind of positive pressure internally. And very fortunately, we didn't remove a single element from the roadmap, because that's a question often as well. Was there always 40 initiatives? Actually, we started with 33, so we achieved all 33, and we added on a few more
well, that
as
just
we
goes
proceeded.
back to what you were saying before, is digital isn't a destination, right?
Right. It's a constant evolution. With the end of the Bloomberg administration, obviously we had a clear sort of endpoint in sight, and obviously hope that the current administration is building on that. We know they have plans to do so, but yes, you're never done. You're never done.
And some of the big check boxes there, right? So you invested in the infrastructure. We've got more education, bigger online engagement, especially this tech sector support. But the overhaul of the website, what were some of the big challenges for you getting the low-income residents connected, or overhauling the website or the learning programs?
There are all of these initiatives were enormously complex. You look at something like there's free public Wi-Fi in more than 50 parks.
Right, that's great.
That reflects an enormous amount of work and investment, both from external partners like AT&T, which sponsored a large number of those, Time Warner Cable, Cablevision, as well as the Parks Department, for example, and the city's IT department, which had to actually create those Wi-Fi hotspots, all the way up through a purely digital engagement, such as NYC.gov, which began with mining an enormous amount of data. The website is incredibly data-driven. What you see on the homepage is what people are coming to our homepage for. So instead of saying, here's what we want to push to people, here's what we want to broadcast, we started with, why are people coming to our website, and how can we serve them as quickly as possible? And when we were identifying how we'd measure the success of the website, it's actually a bit funny, because most organizations, their goal is to keep someone on their website for as long as possible,
right.
Whether they want them to complete a transaction, et cetera. For us, sometimes our KPI was, how do we get them off the website as quickly as possible? If you're coming to report something or complain, you don't want to have to spend half an hour finding the right route to do so. And so that's why we completely transformed our website. 311, the city's customer service. Again, coming back to this question of customer service, the city's customer service organization and platform is now front and center on the homepage. That was something that had never been done before. It was seen as a completely different product and completely different group. And we changed the definition of NYC.gov to say, this is about service, because that's why people are coming to this website. And so it needs to be front and center. And enormous amount of stakeholder input, reviews, et cetera, and ultimately a product we were really happy with.
So I don't want to get too wonky, but we have about 7 minutes left. And I cover now not just chief digital officers, but I thought it was important to cover chief data officers as well in our annual talent map. And you're like this unique hybrid in that you have the skills and the responsibilities of a lot of chief digital officers, which is generally, not to sort of generalized, but it's generally front end, sort of product development,
right.
P&L responsibility in the private sector. But we're also now covering chief data officers, and that's not necessarily the front end stuff. That's more, how do we integrate data into our existing systems, taxonomies, permissions, security, making sure you respect people's privacy. It's a completely different animal.
Right.
And then on top of that, you also seem to be really strong in social media, which is, again, not always a skill set for most chief digital officers. Some of them do it well. For example, Perry Hewitt in Columbia University, Sri Srinivasan here in New York City, who used to be at Columbia, is now at the Met. But you seem to be able to be, have a finger in every one of these fields. And I wonder if that's the chief digital officer of the future. Do you consider yourself more a chief data officer or a chief digital officer? Because for the people in the audience, there are chief data officers in San Francisco, Mark Heald in Philadelphia, who just stepped down, but they're more focused on the data side and not necessarily the social and the digital. Did you want to maybe
Sure.
comment on that? And then I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the data sets that you sent out to the public.
Absolutely. I think you're accurate in your definition of the digital officer. I think it's about taking those technology assets and helping to ensure that the digital interface that connects it with the public, whether that's your constituents or your customers, is user-centric, intuitive, accessible, and overall supporting your business goals. And at the City of New York, we were very fortunate, and similarly at the state, to have dedicated individuals in the chief data officer roles. And I think that's important to continue that way. Where we came in was, how do we leverage those resources that they are unlocking, that they're working so hard to internally make sure that there's data sharing across agencies to improve efficiencies and improve service delivery. But how do we also make sure that all of that data that's out there is being leveraged in a way that's useful? Because we found out that if you build it, they will come is not accurate.
Right.
Is you put out 2,000 data sets, and you have to be really, really interested in government data to dig through that. And
right.
Journalists, researchers, academics will do it. But what we wanted to do was really entice developers and technologists to focus, for example, on that operational data that can help us so much. So looking at things like 311, and also, not to get too wonky, but one of the most exciting opportunities there is to create an application programming interface, an API, that will allow our 311 system talk and communicate with another app that someone else created. So say, for example, you have a better idea for that pothole app and you think you can make it work even better, or you just want to focus in on one feature. By creating that API, we enable such widely scalable customer service and innovation and improvements in design. So that's very exciting. So that's some of what we did, was how to connecting the public to a lot of those resources.
That's fabulous. Yeah, you really opened it up. And so you have 350 data sets. You increased that to 2,000. But you're right, just because you will get that out into the public hands, it doesn't mean they're actually going to do something. You mentioned you did these design challenges. There was one you did with Tumblr, too, or maybe multiple ones with Tumblr, to encourage this creative use of all these data sets. Did you want to talk about anyone in particular that was very successful or that kind of stood out?
I mean, I think what I could speak to a little bit is how we learned to structure those challenges, because we found out that when you created limits and boundaries and restrictions, you actually fostered even more creativity. Because by just saying, here's the challenge, for example, we had Reinvent Green, helping to create sustainability apps. And when we just said, we'll come up with some apps, it was sort of too overwhelming to start from nothing and build those apps. So what we did was we created a wish list in partnership with the city agencies to say, here are a few ideas if you need a jumping off point. We also created very targeted prize categories to say, if you could create an app, for example, that helps people find the closest place to recycle any given type of object, or the nearest farmer's market, we'll give you a prize for that. So we tried to, again, have that carrot approach of offering a little bit of structure, because what we found is if you just put it out there and you don't create, the other thing about hackathons is you create a sense of urgency. You only have a weekend to solve this problem. That's also why it was so helpful for government, why it's so helpful for any large organization. I think the biggest challenge with constant innovation in large organizations is that you lose that urgency. You're not a startup that's constantly about to either lose to its competitor or run out of money. So how do you force that sense of urgency and create that sense of urgency? And one of the ways that we did that at the city was through these hackathons. So you only had 36 hours, 48 hours, and then you'd have to present what you had built. And that really created a scenario in which you can't use the same old strategies, because whatever they are haven't obviously been successful enough, because it's still a challenge. So you're forced to act quickly, prototype quickly, and you can do so in a very low-risk environment, which I think is key.
That's true. So you're looked upon, in my opinion, I think a lot of people look at you and the things you did in New York City from a global perspective. You know, we now have chief digital officers in Vancouver, right? Jesse was just hired. We've got small towns like Gilbert, Arizona, Dana Birchman, who I think is here, and cities like Brisbane, Australia, and even the European Commission. I mean, Nelly Cruz of the EU wants to hire a chief data and a chief digital officer for every country in the European Union. I mean, it's the state of Rhode Island, Tom Guertin from Woonsocket, Rhode Island. These are some pretty, important roles now. And I guess you've created, they're all looking for best practices. What are you doing to help share what you've done with other people in other cities around the world?
Well, one of the most helpful things to us at the City of New York, and something that we're again doing at the State of New York, is to learn from other cities, to share what we've learned. And we're very fortunate that because of all of these achievements, that there is a lot of interest in learning from the city's best practices. And that's why we put out our digital roadmap every year that also details here's how we did it. And we really encourage that to happen. And we hope that that scales that knowledge sharing. Another way is by listening and meeting with our counterparts in other cities and other countries. So in May of last year, one of the things that we did at the Bloomberg administration, May 2014, May 2013, was we hosted a digital city symposium, and we had over 15 different cities represented and digital practitioners from all of those different areas, and we had individuals from Beijing talking about and Tokyo talking about connectivity. We had someone from London's tech organization talking about how they support and encourage growth in the tech sector there. We had the chief data officer from Buenos Aires, which does a fantastic job.
Wasn't he previously with Gates Foundation?
He may have been. His name is Rudy Borman. He's fantastic. From Buenos Aires, we had Pedro Palacio, who's the chief digital officer from Rio de Janeiro.
Pedro, that's one of the
He's really great as well.
Yeah.
And we all just shared, here's what's working for us. Here's what we'd like to ask you questions about. We had Chicago and
So you
Philly.
see real growth in chief digital and chief data officers in other cities. We're just starting to see that really ramp up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now on to New York State. Congratulations on the
thank
new
you
position.
so much. Incredibly exciting.
Yeah, and again, I want to touch on this, what you keep saying about how Governor Cuomo has a focus on customer excellence,
Exactly.
and customer service. It just doesn't seem like a government official taking an approach that you would really. There was IBM does a study every year. They interview CEOs, and the issue this year was all about the customer-focused organization, and how you really have to focus on the customer. Tell us a little bit about Governor Cuomo and his approach.
Absolutely. And obviously I'm very new into the position, but when he first approached me about the role, it was completely driven by this very deep intuitive understanding and focus on customer service. And his view was, why, as a New Yorker, would I be forced to go to different agencies to solve a problem? Let's consolidate, let's streamline that approach, let's make it fully user-centric, and let's really transform that experience of engaging with New York State. So we've already seen some of the success of that through a tool called the License Center, which consolidates where you can apply for licenses online.
Oh, State of Rhode Island did that too. Tom Guertin was in charge of making it easier for companies to get a license to do business.
Exactly. Yeah. There you go. And but not just business. This is permits everything from fishing and parks passes to hunting, the various different permits and passes that the state of New York issues. So that was really sort of one of the seeds, and we're building on that further to say, as a state, how can we really provide that streamlined, completely customer-focused experience? And the great thing is also, we're also looking and developing our digital roadmap as a state. So again, we really encourage all that input from the public if you do have ideas on how we can build on that further. Yeah. And when you look at some of the opportunities, the MTA, so that the public transit system in New York City and New York State, looking at the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, there is a process and there's an experience that would be really exciting to continue to evolve. And they already just recently launched a mobile responsive website to make that even easier. So the steps are there, and we have great partners across the state and across the government structure that are very forward-thinking, embracing open source technologies, embracing a mobile-first and a fully responsive approach to how we develop our websites and how we develop our digital assets. The governor organized that more than $2 billion will be going to outfitting schools, so talking about education and training with technologies that help to support students and prepare them for the next generation of the workforce. And in addition to that, Startup New York. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it.
Commercials
Startup NY. So tons of incentives tax incentives and various different incentives for companies to grow and thrive across the state. So
you've got your hands full.
Yes, and in a very, very exciting way.
And we want to help. I think I think Steve may have a slide that shows ways that our digital community can help, and the CDOs in the room and any other digital leader, but while Steve's pulling that up, oh, great, there it is. So is that right? NY Gov Cuomo?
Yes, exactly. So that's how you
New
can
York
follow
Loves
the
Tech.
governor, NY Gov Cuomo. You can also, of course,
the
like
Tumblr?
the Governor Andrew Cuomo page on Facebook. NY Loves Tech. We have a Tumblr and a Twitter account and a hashtag. So wherever you prefer to, whatever platform you prefer, we encourage your input there. And again, I'm always open to any suggestions that
And
that
maybe
you
we
have.
could, would you be okay to take some questions and maybe some
Absolutely.
suggestions or comments?
Sure.
If anyone has any, if we could get someone to bring a mic around. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel?
Hi.
Any
Dan
potholes you need fixed?
No, I'm interested in your view of whether you think what you've done will help protect the city in the future from a Giuliani or Bush-style leader who systematically denied access to as much information as possible. The policy in the Giuliani administration was to deny and refuse most FOIA requests. The Bush administration acted the same way. Do you think that, it's possible that the digitization kind of provides protection against that sort of regression on, open access to government information?
Yes, I think in short, regardless of who's in power, information, there's the expression information wants to be free, and digital really enables that. And I think that what we see is every day the world is becoming more open, more transparent, more accountable, and that the public and people outside of the traditional government structure are empowered to request that information. And also now there are many more legal levers to ensure that there's access to that information. So for example, there was important open data legislation that was signed into law by Mayor Bloomberg during his administration, and with collaboration from a number of different city council members, for example, that legally requires the city to make available anything, data, as long as it is not personally, infringing on any privacy or personally identifiable, to make that data or creating any security concerns, to make that data available. So I think both from a technological structure and from a legal perspective, that data will just continue to be, more accessible and more open.
Yes, we get a mic over there. Thank you.
First of all, Rachel, congratulations on all your accomplishments and good luck with State of New York. Curious about State of New York's efforts, if you've yet touched in your new role on the Internet of Things and if there's some rollout there.
Yes, I would say it's sort of early days in terms of assessing at a state level, but I think it's a very exciting thing for us to approach. At the city, we began to really dive into that, I would say a little bit with the Reinvent Payphones project, for example, because we started to look at what's the infrastructure that we have out there, how can we make it more dynamic, and how can we make it so that that infrastructure itself is a living, breathing entity that helps to communicate information, that perhaps is equipped with sensors that can help to make our city even smarter, whether it's can we assess pollution levels in the air? Can we assess noise levels? Can we see the speed of the cars that are moving around? There's obviously, of course, also privacy concerns that we need to respect among all of those things. But that was very exciting. In Reinvent Payphones, we also had a number of universities and design organizations involved, and we started to get in. We started to sort of touch upon that. So one of the partners we have that's really great is the Center for Urban Science and Progress, which is a new school that's in collaboration with the City of New York and New York University and NYU Poly. And what that really sought to answer is some of those data questions, but also getting into this wider sort of Internet of Things. And from my perspective, one of the interesting areas there is how do we tap into this vast network of infrastructure that we have as a city or have as a state, and how do we leverage that more efficiently and truly turn our city into a smart city? That's obviously just one small piece of that puzzle, and there's lots of different elements to look at there. But it's certainly core to a long-term data strategy.
Yes, maybe right there, and then we'll go to Janice.
Great. Could you describe for me the first 30 days when you took off, well, when you took your role at New York? I'd like to know how you went about putting together the roadmap and what was your first activities as you started that process.
That's a funny question because when I first asked Rachel that she's about the digital strategy, putting together the digital strategy, I think she said something along the lines of, it takes a strategy to create the digital strategy.
Right, and that's really what it was. I mean, when I first joined the city, similarly at the state, it is just a deep dive. I felt like I was, back in school, but times a million, because just meeting dozens and dozens of people, learning how the organization is structured. So the first step is getting your footing and developing relationships and hopefully trust with the people that you will be working with, whose contributions will ultimately determine success for the organization. So it was an enormous number of connecting with colleagues, learning about what they do, learning about the digital assets that are out there, connecting with folks outside of government, and it was pretty nonstop sort of interactions, meetings, learning, and then from there building on that. And I think that was, and obviously it was a bit frustrating for me because at first I just wanted to dive in and start building things and start building tools. And before this, I was an entrepreneur. I had a citizen journalism startup, and so that's I think what your sort of instinct is to do as an entrepreneur. But that would have been a huge mistake. So I was really grateful that I did go through that process.
Janice?
First of all, David, I want to compliment you on having this as a topic because I think it's so needed in our country. And Rachel, you've done a great job, and I compliment you on that. I hope that there's going to be some sharing among cities and also states in terms of what you've accomplished, and that that'll roll out across the country, because I think, having seen municipalities in action, there's a lot to be done here.
Thank you.
Is that part of the plan?
It is, and we're obviously in very early days in terms of developing what structure that will take, but already we look to our counterparts in other states to see how they're succeeding and what's working or not working for them, and we're looking into developing a similar structure to share knowledge among the states and see how we can support each other better, because we all have very similar goals, and we can only win by supporting one another.
Thank you, Janice. Babs, did you have a question? Yeah. Over here.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Rachel. That was really an incredible conversation. I thought it was very helpful. The one part in New York City, if I look at some other cities, especially in like Tokyo and in South Korea, but even in, I was in Kenya a few weeks ago, there's a great system for kind of automating payments through everything from NFC to your phones to even through, kind of text messaging in with M-Pesa in Kenya. And I feel like New York is still way behind in that. I mean, I know people use Square, but when I moved back here, I recognized it just didn't feel like we've come very far in that area. Is there any plans, or did you try to attack that and there's too much bureaucracy, or what kind of has driven the slowness of that, so to speak?
That's interesting. I think it's a great question. So I'll sort of address two areas of that. So first, outside of government, we did have mobile payment solutions such as Square, Venmo, PayPal, I'm trying to think, Dwala, who are all part of that digital toolkit for small businesses that we developed with the Small Business Services Department. And so that was one way that we tried to equip the city's small businesses with the tools they need to encourage the adoption of more mobile payments. For the city itself, and I think I'd have to go and look at it one by one, we do accept online payments for a wide variety, and I believe the vast majority now of different interactions, sort of any kind of transaction between the city and the public. Mobile payments is improving, but it's certainly not there yet. And I think it also reflects sort of across the full country, the level of adoption that we're seeing or not seeing with mobile payments. Government, of course, is unique in basically the liabilities and insurance and any kind of interactions. And it does, for example, it does process a huge amount of different transactions, whether you're looking at, states taxes at the state level, or fines, parking tickets, et cetera, at the city level. And that is a little bit slower to move. But what I can say is that there is an interest in constantly improving on that. So again, at the state level, you can file your taxes online. At the city level, the city is in the process of, and they may have well completed it since I departed in December, in the process of updating the Department of Finance's back-end payment system and working with Citibank and using a more modern approach. And something that we talked about extensively was, could we create an API that will allow various different partners to help us to more easily streamline how those payments and how those transactions with the city that connect the city to various different members of the public and individuals, can we improve that process further? So I would say, I think you're absolutely correct that that's an area where we need more investment, and we're not there yet. But there's some fundamental, the basics are in place to start to move the needle on that. That once they're implemented, we can build on that further with those kinds of solutions. And we've talked with vendors and internal folks about that as well.
Great, thanks. I think we had a question. Sorry to make you traverse the room again. Maybe while he's going across, I had a question, one that all project managers probably come across. You get into a project, you think it's going to be really easy, it becomes really hard, it takes more time and resources than you thought. Or the opposite is true, you think it's going to be hard and it's really easy. Do you have any experience on, a project that you worked on that was either really easy and that you thought was going to be difficult? Or?
I mean, I'll take the more positive spin, that it's basically we were so surprised. So when my team was first assembled at the city, for example, and we were not sure, we weren't sure, how are we going to persuade, for example, our colleagues to embrace social media? It can be scary. Maybe they don't know the tools. Maybe they don't think it makes sense. And in fact, we had the opposite problem, that everybody wanted a Facebook page. Everybody wanted a Twitter account and an app, that we had the opposite problem of saying, okay, we've already got 300. Maybe we want to go easy on the public. Maybe they don't need one for every single agency. And we were totally blown away that actually the appetite was so strong that in fact we had to sort of
you created a task force, right?
Yeah, exactly. We created the SMART committee, which was all the social media rock stars to have a little bit more coordination across government, and then occasionally say, let's not compete with one another, and let's make sure that we're not overwhelming the public. We do want to provide those various different accounts so that you can have that deep dive, closer relationship with an individual agency. But let's make sure we're being strategic about it. So there was almost the opposite impact there.
Interesting. Yes, sorry.
Hi, Judy Simmons from DDG. First of all, I think it's great to have somebody like you in government. I worked in government early in my career, and it's really a wonderful thing to have people with your skills and talents working in government. So I hope that encourages other people like you to do that. Generally, the voting turnout in the United States is pretty low. And there have been a lot of efforts, Rock the Vote, for voter registration. But have you engaged in terms of using digital to make the voting experience more user-friendly?
Yes, and I would stop short, obviously, at providing online voting, which is a very interesting topic, and something that I'm still sort of informing myself and educating myself on. At the city level, what we did do was we worked closely with groups like the Campaign Finance Board and Art Chang, who worked with that group and helped to develop a really great voting app, for example. And these apps enabled the public to find their polling location very easily and quickly, provided transparent information on all the different candidates. And I think that a lot of those tools were incredibly helpful. And there were also tools such as using hashtags during elections to report problems that we could then track and make sure that we were on top of those and solving them as they emerged. But TurboVote is one app that comes to mind. There were a few others. Esther Fuchs, who is a professor at Columbia SIPA, also developed a great app. who'sontheballot.org. So I think those informational, educational apps can really help to encourage more civic engagement, and taking that to the next level obviously would be exciting as well.
Well, on that note, I mean, everywhere you turn, you hear people saying government is inept, government's the problem, it's the government's fault. But the government is us, and it is refreshing. I mean, it's the contract we make with each other in civilized society, and I think in the olden days it was about making sure the bridges, and even today the roads work, but in the digital age it's about making sure we have Wi-Fi in parks and that we have innovation, we have these apps and keep us in communication with first responders and when disasters strike, and somebody needs to own it, and it's just so refreshing. Thankfully, we do have people like Rachel. I think she could take a job just about anywhere. She's had work in as a startup. Any incumbent would hire you. Any startup would want you if you don't start up your own. And instead, she's chosen to put her talent and her energy into government service and public service. And I think it's the definition of the word public servant in its most decent and honorable usage. And so that's why it's my honor to present on behalf of the Chief Digital Officer Club and its members the Chief Digital Officer of the Year award to Rachel Haot this year.
Oh, wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. Oh, my goodness.
No, not Michelle.
Wow. Thank you. Great. I'm completely shocked. Thank you so much.